We welcome you to another Sunday School lesson. Sunday School is a blessing and gift from God. This lesson will help us describe Jesus' view of humility. Distinguish between behaviors that indicate humility and those that don't. Demonstrate humility in our choices in the days ahead. Only Luke recorded this occasion when Jesus went to dinner at the home of one of the chief Pharisees. Here he gave his host and guests a lesson in etiquette, in the parable of the ambitious guest. Jesus went to a dinner on a Sabbath day. Jesus taught those at the Pharisees' dinner about true humility and generosity. Verse 7 says, when he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. This scene is as rich as it can be. In that day they did not have place cards at the table. Place cards must have been originated by some hostess who wanted to preserve her furniture. Without place cards at the table, there was a mad rush to get to the best seats. In that day couches rather than chairs were used so that the guests reclined at the table. At the head table there would be 4 seats, the center seat would be the place of honor. Around on the other side would be 3 seats with the middle as the seat of honor. Around on another side are 3 seats, 3 again the middle as the seat of honor. On the 4th side of the table another set of 3 seats with the middle as the seat of honor. It is understandable that the older Pharisees could not move as fast as some of the younger Pharisees. Can you imagine what a hilarious picture it must have been to see these men running as fast as they could for the seats of honor? Verse 8 says, when someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. Jesus told everyone to be humble and to not seek personal honor. The decision of who sat at the best seats was at the discretion of the host. When you are invited to dinner, don't rush to get the seat of honor. The host may have someone else in mind for that seat. Verse 9 says, if so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give this person your seat. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. The host would have to come to you and say, move over to the lowest seat so my guest of honor can sit here. To get to the lowest seat, all you have to do is move over 1 seat, but it is embarrassing. Being publicly asked by the host to step down and go to the back of the room, however discreetly, would leave the other guests second-guessing not the intentions of the hosts but the worthiness of that guest. When we strive to achieve or acquire recognition for ourselves, we are on our own. Verse 10 says, but when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. When you are invited to a dinner, always go to the lowest seat. You will not have any trouble getting it because no one else will be trying for it. Then when the host comes in and sees where you are sitting, he will say, you are to be my guest of honor. Please sit in the seat of honor. Then someone else will have to move. This is good manners and just the opposite of the demonstration the Pharisees always put on. This part of the verse implies God's goal to exalt us as we see in the phrase, friend, go up higher. Verse 11 says, for all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Our ways are not his ways. We want the best for ourselves. But Jesus would have humility before self-importance. We must be little in our own eyes before we can be large in his eyes. The person who does not humble himself or herself will invite public humiliation. This biblical principle applies to everyone. People who lift themselves up suffer the inevitable fate of humiliation. They may lose esteem or status. In contrast, those who humble themselves shall have their status elevated. The real lesson Jesus is trying to impart to the disciples is that in God's kingdom, God will bring about a reversal of human social structure. The ones considered among the lowest socially will be exalted or lifted up, and those who have enjoyed the highest social position, either as a result of the family they were born into or wealth acquired legitimately or through trickery, will be lowered. Verse 12 says, then Jesus said to his host, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back and so you will be repaid. Next, the Lord Jesus corrects the host. The host, like the guests, is more concerned with social status than the needs of those lower on the social ladder. Most of us have the same guests over to dinner one time, and the next time we go to one of their homes, and so it goes week after week. It is sort of a round-robin situation. The Lord is condemning the Pharisees' way of doing things. There is nothing wrong with having your group in once in a while, but have you ever thought about doing something for those who have nothing? They cannot pay you back, they will not be able to invite you to dinner next week. Don't just give to the poor, but invite them to the table to glorify God. Verse 13 says, "But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind." Those counted among the poor were the needy, the weak, and those who were dependent, the orphans and the widows, who were usually in the lower social classes and in need of protection from abuse and neglect. God provided for the poor through his principle of gleaning. Landowners were instructed to leave the remaining grain around the outer perimeters of the fields for the poor to gather. The courts were admonished to deal justly with the poor. The early church recognized the importance of caring for widows and took up offerings to meet their needs. We are admonished to be mindful of the poor. Every believer will be held accountable for how he or she has responded to those in need. One of the ways to judge our relationship to Christ is to observe how we respond to the hungry, the thirsty, the naked, the stranger, and the prisoner. Compassion is regarded as evidence of the presence of Christ inside the heart. Verse 14 says, "And you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." Do a few things where you will be the giver with no thought of ever being paid back. To give a feast for the poor would be an act of generosity, since these people could not repay the host. Jesus implied that when the host only invited his desirable friends, his giving came from selfish ambition, not love. When we eat together, it should be a time of loving fellowship and joyful gratitude to God. Hospitality is ministry only if our motive is to help others and glorify God. The repayment for this good deed would take place at the resurrection of the righteous. The generous person trusts him in the act of generosity, knowing that only God can repay when the recipient cannot. Jesus' message is that performing such acts of kindness without the expectation of reward will not only bless the individual here on earth. He or she will also receive a heavenly reward at the resurrection of the just. Key verse. All those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Luke 14:11. Jesus uses this parable to teach us that humility is an intentional action. As Christians, we should always consider others before thinking of ourselves. When the host sees that a person with whom they have a relationship has taken the lowest place, they will invite that guest to move to a higher level. Recognition, in this sense, is not just physical for sake of reward, but it is also relational and spiritual. Jesus teaches that those who are humble in their actions will soon receive recognition from those who can offer a greater reward. Thought to remember: God's way up is down. Jesus expands the picture of humility by exhorting his audience to invite to their dinner table the needy and those who cannot repay such kindness. Hospitality should be open to all. Hospitality should not only be shown to the rich and famous nor to family members, but to those who cannot repay the favor. Jesus argues that such payback hospitality has no merit. If God reaches out to all, then those who seek to honor him should reach out also. So attending to the poor, crippled, the lame, the blind, is the way up. Our lesson next week is entitled, Called to Sacrifice. Our biblical reference is Mark 1:16-20. We are truly glad you spent time to learn this week's lesson with us. We hope you are blessed and may share these with somebody else. We wish you can join us at the Cubao Church of Christ soon. Our congregation is a place to discover faith, find new friends, grow closer relationship with Christ and serve with each other's gifts. Thank you very much. Have a great week, and God bless you always, dear brothers and sisters.